Grown black folks talk. Why we cannot vet men inside of the common paradigms. Now, before I go any further, you will see this on Monday, May 30th, which is Memorial Day. It's actually the 31st. We're observing it on the 30th because it's Monday. But while you have this day off, I want you to put a pin into something. We are remembering men whose level of responsibility to their country went to the point that they died serving it. Black History Note: Memorial Day begins as Decoration Day during the Civil War. The Black citizens of Richmond decided that they were going to collect the bodies of the Union soldiers that had been left behind and give them a proper burial. And they bought flowers and things of that nature, and they called it Decoration Day. And after World War I, eventually the United States rolled up this celebration into Memorial Day. So there you have a community full of responsible Black people with a sense in their own society that it was necessary to do this because these people had done something to them. The idea of reciprocity. But Memorial Day is about a world full of men who felt so responsible that they were willing and did die for their nation. Now, we can argue about the purposes of our wars. This is not that video. What I want you to put a pin at, whatever you do today, is this idea of responsible men. Maybe the reason we cannot bet men is because we are inside a paradigm that does not address why men are giving up on their responsibilities. That's point one. I owe this viewpoint to FD Signifier. Feek the Signifier. The video is in the description. Dissecting the Manosphere, the deepest 1 hour and 33 minutes you will spend this week. He talks about a lot of things, and I can't do it as well as he can, but I want to summarize his point and add one more, because it really is going to help us to understand why vetting has to look a little bit different than what we talked about, and why all the way up to the United States government can't do it. Because we are locked inside a paradigm that's overlooking several important facts. Basically, I mean, he went into levels of detail that were basic. You have a lot of young men. He started with white men because the manosphere starts there and then comes over to Black men. You have a number of young white men that for whatever reason do not feel like they're following the path they were told to follow, put a pin there. But it is not getting them to the power that they feel should belong to them in manhood. They don't see themselves receiving a path to receiving the respect that they heard of, get that their father and their grandfathers received, because they went to school, white men are rulers of the whole world. No one has told them that white men of lower class were never allowed there. The whole fiction that whiteness in total rules has now broken up. Racism is not doing what it used to do 50, 60 years ago. You ever wonder why these people focus on 1950? I'll come back to that. So as these young men are looking for a way to get the most of their white maleness, this is where the far right comes in and sucks them in. This is also where the manosphere sucks them in as well, because what they teach men to do is then blame it on feminism. Now, never mind that the paradigm in which being an American white man got you practically everything you ever wanted in the whole world peaked in 1950, where we had helped the world defeat Nazi Germany, where we were the only country big enough and strong enough to hold back the Soviet Union and the communist threat. And so we had that on our belt. We had the most powerful wartime economy. And we had come out of the Great Depression into prosperity. 1950, that decade is the last time that the right of the American white man to rule essentially the world was unquestioned in any serious way. And there's only a decade of it, from 1950 to 1960. Now, the reason I say this is the peak of it, because in 1850, inside the United States, yes, certain men had slaves, but most men did not benefit from this except that they were white and at least they were better than black people. But we didn't have domination in the world to this extent. So the peak of this was 1950, and it wouldn't last long. It wouldn't last long in relative terms. So that paradigm of aggrieved entitlement that these young white men have is also something, and of course they're not all young anymore, but this is also something that they have in common with black men as well, except to another level. Because black men would like to displace these white men. They can't. So now you have a double level of aggrieved entitlement. You're looking at what white male life is like at the peak. You would like to have the same thing, but you're a step removed. So what do you also do? Blame feminism. If somehow, and if you think about conservative talking points, we could get back to 1950 with the women under us willing to help us, we might be able to get back to the place that we were. This talking point is very common. But the key thing that I want you to come into is aggrieved entitlement. Now, FD Signify is going to talk about Batman and the Joker and how basically they're the same messed up guy. Neither of them are responsible for the society, but Batman has enough resources and enough intellect to be able to at least find a spot in society that he basically despairs of. He's an active nihilist as opposed to a passive nihilist who is just content that it's going to burn and may as well enjoy it as he goes. That's the Joker. But he has enough resources and intellect to make of the world what he wants to a point, to at least do what he wants to do. Batman finds his meaning by fighting crime the way he wants to do it, as opposed to working within the structures that he can work with as a billionaire. He's irresponsible as well, given the resources that he has. He doesn't need to be doing personal crime fighting, but this is what makes him feel good, so he's going to do that. The Joker is just enjoying himself, watching the world burn and participating in the burning. They're both irresponsible. But what the society provides Batman is hero status. And so society has a use as long as it provides him what? Hero status. He goes into this in detail that I'm not going to. His video's an hour and a half. We don't really do that over here. But what I want you to understand is, now that we've dealt with the concept of aggrieved entitlement, now that we've covered Batman and Joker, you can probably guess that since the Black community does not have the resources of its white counterpart, you're going to get a lot more men who go to the Joker, but we kind of know who the bad boys are. And the only way you deal with a bad boy is that you think that you're going to burn along with the rest of society and you may as well enjoy what you can while you go, because bad boys are more exciting. So if all you think of your chances in life of being able to get a little bit more excitement and a little more fun, that actually makes sense. But why are the good guys so dangerous? The good guys want to be Batman. The good guys want to be the hero. And they have done what America has told them to do. They went to school, they got a job, they got a car, they did the bare minimum, but they look at the Jokers and they think, at least I'm functional. Where is my adoration? Where are the women? Where are the women of my dreams? Where is my respect? When do I get to be Leave the Beaver's daddy? When do I get that kind of respect from society? Well, if you're a Black man, you're not going to get it from society. Well, then when do I get that kind of respect from the Black woman? So this is why the good guys are so dangerous. They are particularly aggrieved because they feel like in a society that has way more people that are contributing to the burning, they feel like they should get all kind of extra credit. But here's the thing about aggrieved entitlement. Doesn't matter whether it's a good guy or a bad guy. You wouldn't want to live with the Batman or Joker. Because here's the thing about men and gentlemen, I know that some of you are here, correct me if I'm wrong. When men feel wrong, they have a much higher degree of needing vindication. Somebody got to pay for it. I've been wronged. Maybe even 30 years ago, that girl put me down in middle school. Somebody got to pay for it. There's a gentleman that made a song, have something happen to him way back, and every girl since then has been payback. It's got to be a sense of vindication. Men need vindication for closure in a way that women don't. Women need closure, but it has to do with seeking understanding. Men want if they're disrespected, they frankly want someone to die. The offense is that big. Not every man will act on it, but men, gentlemen, you correct me if I'm wrong. That's just something very deep and primal. So if black men feel like they've done all the right things and they don't get what they feel they're entitled to, they will go to rage and violence just as quickly as the so-called bad guys, because they're two sides of the same coin. Living in a society that if what you want is the American materialistic dream, you're not going to be able, if you don't come with the ability of having that, you're not going to get the respect of the society by getting there. No. If you're a black man, you're not going to get there, period. Now, even white men can't get there. Racism doesn't do for you what you used to do, because more and more people are sitting up be like, nope, 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 nope. Try to step outside out of 4chan and some Reddit things and say the most, there's a concept he talks about as edgelords, where they can talk to each other in the most shocking and horrible ways. Try to do that in public, though, and keep a job. Even Donald John Trump couldn't keep his job. And he's the entire president of the entire United States of America. And it caught up with him. And if Joseph Robinette Biden is not careful, he also will not be able to keep his job. And these men are American white men at the top of American white manness. So if it's not working for top white men anymore the way it used to, then it's definitely not going to work for the average black man. It won't even work for a billionaire black man, for that matter. Billionaire black men, I notice, are pretty careful about what they do and say. They understand what's going on. They want to stay in their spot. But for all intents and purposes, they can either be good, upstanding men or not. But they're in the Batman seat. They're going to be considered good men. They're going to be considered heroes because they have the resources and the intellect to make themselves useful to society in whatever way they choose. If you don't have that, if you're just an average working man who has the same dreams of being able to work one's way to the kind of woman, let's say that this man gets there. Is he going to be any better to the woman that helped him? No, because she's not the goal. She was just the person that helped him along the way, but that's definitely not the goal if that man gets to what he wants. So no, these good guys, because they have the same aggrieved entitlement, this is why they do not make safe mates. But also it is why we cannot vet them. Because to be able to vet them means that we have to go back and acknowledge that the American materialistic dream is in essence a lie, and no one should be believing it or living by it. Let me break down, and especially to my members of the African diaspora, survivors and descendants, the descendants of the survivors of an enslavement so cruel that the world has never seen its like, where people were reduced to cattle for profit in perpetuity, or at least as near to it as people were able to get. In the United States of America, 13 generations of human beings to put down the foundation of the American materialist dream, in which if you can profit from it, it's fine and even celebrated to grind human life to powder. And this is given to you as the goal. As long as you profit from it, it's okay. And you will be able to find fulfillment and happiness getting more and more stuff that you're going to leave behind as soon as you die, that you can get more and more trinkets and more toys. And that if you do the right things, if you get the job, if you go to the right schools, you get to the right job, you're entitled to fulfillment in your life, however you conceive that to be, as long as you do not question the American way as the only and superior way as set forth by our white, male, slave-owning founders. Men who went home and held on to Sally Hemings for 36 years, going from a pedophile to a rapist. Men who needed another set of teeth and had them yanked from a slave with no anesthetic. That's George Washington, who also is the same man who put his vast influence. It was not settled when George Washington was a young man that Black people should be in slavery in perpetuity. Would you like to know who was the most influential person in the United States of America who put his whole weight down on that? That would be that same George Washington. But hey, as long as you don't question the rightness of what they did and you go to the right school, get the right job, we'll let you advance in America because the goal is for you to be as much like those criminals against humanity. But as long as you're good states, as long as you uphold, you were productive to society, we'll still let you advance. Well, like I said, it's not working for average white men. George Washington detested the average white man. James Madison detested the average white man. But they knew they had to do a little bit to keep them on board, so they let them all be white. Back home, they'd be serfs. Back home, they'd be petty criminals, made indentured servants because they were in debt. Back home, they'd be abused almost as much as these people would abuse their slaves here, particularly if you were from Ireland or somewhere like that. But here, you get to be white. That's your compensation. Well, that's not working anymore. The gap between the have and the have-nots, even among white men, is too wide for this to work anymore. So if it's not working for white men, then it's really not going to work for Black men. And so this aggrieved entitlement builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. And who's going to suffer for it? Any woman fool enough to get messed up with a man in this mindset. That having the kind of worship that the founder and fathers get is the goal. And that doing certain acts of the American rite of passage will get you access, which it will not. And if it doesn't, then you're free to ground out your rage and to manipulate as many women as you can to get to where you're trying to go. And if all that fails, you can just kill them because you didn't get what you want. Now you can get your vindication by doing that. You can kill, abuse, manipulate, all that. Because that's what America allows, has always been comfortable with men of a certain status to do. The problem is trying to get there if you're not rich and you're not white and you're not male is just going to leave you frustrated and left to take it out on whoever you can get a hold of. And this is why we cannot vet these men. This is why people are surprised when nurses and sergeants prove just as murderous toward Black women as so-called Pookies and Ray Rays. This is why. We don't have the tools inside the American paradigm of, go to school, get a good job, and you'll be given access to the American dream. The tools do not exist inside the paradigm to vet these men. For the CIA, the FBI, and the United States military to be able to vet these men, they would have to get to the root of the problem that we have a system in which men who are murderous, men who are abusers, men who grind other people to life for profit are admired and held up for honor as long as they provide sufficient service to society. General Washington helped win the Revolutionary War and would not be king, which allowed us to eventually develop representative and then later Republican government and later have civil rights. And as long as General Washington, later President Washington, did that, we're going to cover him with unquestioned honor no matter what he did, no matter what those screams were from the back of the plantation, because President Washington needs a new set of teeth. And because he's earned the right to be a terrible criminal against humanity by his works. So for the United States government to be able to weed out other men like this, who seem to come with a good resume, who have good sets of works, for the CIA, the FBI, and most of our jobs to be able to vet men like that, they would have to admit that that's not enough. But if they admit that that's not enough, the whole American system starts to unravel. Because now we got to start asking questions all the way back. Now we have to start admitting that yes, your private life does have a lot to do with whether or not we want you in a position of authority in public. And so they're not going to be vetted inside that paradigm. And guess what? If you're trying to be Mrs. Jefferson, if you want to live your dreams of avarice through some man, you're not going to be able to vet that either, because your paradigm is off too. Let me go to the more positive side of this. Now, if you want to watch that video, FD Signifier has done it. I'll have it in the description. It's the deepest hour and a half you ever, one of the deepest hour and a half you've ever spent. I got some more for you. I've been using all this downtime to really look at some information. Whew. But let me turn to the positive side of this. If looking for good guys is not enough, because in American paradigm, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison are good guys. That ought to tell you everything you need to know about why good guys are not enough. But because good guys have this sense of aggrieved entitlement if they can't get what they want from you, which is still the same as the bad guys. Now what? Now what? Stephanie Perry, content creator Stephanie Perry, suggests that you get outside the United States of America, you just marry a man, look to be with men who are acculturated in a different way, who are not acculturated in a culture in which women are just chattel just for existing. Because the problem is not the race of the man, the problem is that American attitude that he should be able to dominate the world by virtue of existing. The problem is that attitude that was best left in 1950 when no one questioned it. Now, not everybody's going to move, and not everybody's going to move right now. So, excuse me, y'all, I'm still doing my recovery, and my throat will dry out faster than it used to. So, what do you look for? Well, I offer you a Christian concept for something to think about. The Christian is commanded to be in the world and not of the world. Further on in 1 John, it says, love not the world, nor the things in the world. For if any man loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. From a sheer Christian perspective, it basically has to do with whatever the world system is around you, you are not to cop to it because it is corrupt. This covers every race of people, it covers every culture. Generally speaking, most in the United States is very corrupt. Now, we have different subcultures, but we see from discussing FD Signifier how the same corrupt subculture for men is causing trouble for men on two different ends of the economics, two different problems. So they're in the same larger American culture. So what you might want to vet for is for someone who has realized that American materialism is not the goal of life. Another idea from the Christian side of life. The Bible says to pray for those who live in authority over us. Why? That we may live a quiet and peaceful life. Contentment and peace. It also says, what are the fruit of the Holy Spirit? If a man has the Holy Spirit actually operating in his life, there's a lot that goes with that. But here's what you're going to see dominating his life. And it has nothing to do with his level of income. It has nothing to do with his color. It has nothing to do with his position in the economy. Love, joy, peace, gentleness, goodness, patience, meekness, faith, self-control. The ninefold fruit of the Spirit. Now, if you're not a Christian, this is not going to work exactly the same for you. But a man who what you'll begin to look at, and I should also mention the 21st century economy basically works better. There's something else to look for, and racism plays into this. Men who are very much on the American model are very much on individualism. They're always going to be talking about what they're going to do and what they're going to do, what they're doing, and how they're going to outcompete. Now, the global economy that we're working in is collaborative. In other words, people are making things happen, and the only person that they're necessarily competing with is the person that people have to compete with to make money in this society is always to be competing with the more ignorant version of themselves yesterday. So this means that the man needs to be reflective, he needs to be committed to growth, and he needs to be able to play well with a lot of different others, because that's where the money is going. But if he doesn't have those qualities, if he has to go in and dominate every single situation and make his money that way as an earner, one of the reasons that people are mad because they can't be in the office, because office politics is another version of that. Being able to compare yourselves with other people and see how you're doing, that's a part of that. Well, guess what? That paradigm is also falling apart. So can this person, number one, operate in the 21st century economy, understanding that his competition is not you, but himself, the more ignorant version of himself? That's his chief competition. He doesn't have to inflict that on someone else, because he can see his way to improve his situation through work on his own skills and talents and abilities. Does he know how to get into and create those kind of situations for himself? Is he creative? Is he willing to learn? Is he enslaved to the idea that the only way to do things and that the only goal that matters would be just as good in 1950? It is a whole 2022, and we're about to be halfway done with that. Now, this also should also put in your mind that if you do meet a man like this, you better be ready. A man like this is not going to be interested in impressing you every year with more stuff, although he should be able to provide and protect. But his idea of taking you out, many Black women are concerned about escaping from the dangerous situations that we are living in, granted. But his idea of doing this may not be to take you to, the goal may not be to have lifestyles of the rich and famous. Content creator Alicia Renese talked about being married to the kind of man where all they got on the road with an RV and they traveled the country and found places that they wanted to be and lived there. These men have slightly different ideas. These are the men who are outdoorsmen who maybe living part-time off grid. See, if you want the big city life, you got to deal with big city assumptions. And the big city, because the big city depends on the system. I'm not saying everybody here is like that, because there's a thing called slow livers, who are people who are in the city, who are unofficially part of the slow movement. I'm one of them. There are people in the city that value parks and beaches and time to go into nature. But if you want to be a city girl with a city man, you got to deal with the problem to go for that, because this is the assumption that urban America and all its stuff and getting to the top of that society and that lifestyle, that's the American materialist dream. So if that's who you are, that man's not looking for you. You would wreck a piece of his life. But you're not going to be able to vet men for this unless this is something that you are committed to. You're not going to be a match for this man. And in closing, this is also why a lot of women have this mindset and don't know it. Well, he better be able to take me out to a such and such place. I'm not going to Applebee's. He better not take me on a coffee date. We sure aren't going for a walk. He needs to spend money on me. Okay, that's the same thinking about putting your worth together based on the American materialistic dream. I'm not saying he shouldn't demonstrate that he can provide. I'm not saying that, because someone's going to quibble over the cost of coffee. That's a problem. But what you really want to do is get past 2 for $20 and get past, because again, in the American paradigm of what a man pays for, he believes he owns. Tony Gaskins actually said that first. Content creator Tony Gaskins, let me give him his credit. What a man pays for, he believes he owns. But I'm going to go one more level. You know what that is? You're a Black woman. What a man paid for 150 years ago, he owned. And there were Black male slave owners too. I'm going to say this again. You might not want to have on a first date, because what you're trying to find out is, how does that man see his money? How does that man see his life? If he's going to be an American materialist, you want to spend as little time and as little money as possible finding that out and getting away from this man, because aggrieved entitlement will have a good man, quote unquote, a nurse or a sergeant killing you, aggrieved entitlement will have an image consultant who was doing good work if you look at his early videos, turning on Black women for a dime to try to compete with a wife who didn't quite divorce him, who at his apogee still had between 2 and 4 times as much money as he did. He would sell, this will have a man who ought to be, who is aggrieved in his entitlement, sitting up talking about, if your daughter complains about your man, that you should believe your man because kids lie, and let that man continue to sit there and do things to your daughter. This is how aggrieved entitlement will take even a man who is trying to do something positive because he has not gotten the least bit of life coaching and therapy, will turn him into someone who is a danger to Black women and Black girls. Sitting up talking about, if you with a high value man, you ought to let that man have sex with you after the 3rd date. I'm like, excuse me, with STDs running wild. But see, here's the thing about it. Perhaps these are not any of these men, that these kind of so-called good guys. Perhaps you don't want to be with them at all, because aggrieved entitlement will cause a man to be able to justify destroying you to get to the goal that they are trying to reach, to become this twisted idea of an American man that if he does all the right things and works all the right works, we're going to let him have his idea of heaven anyhow. He can be an abuser. He can be a murderer. He can take advantage without permission of women's bodies. But if he does the correct work and he puts on the proper suit and he has a proper job, we'll just let him do what George Washington and James Madison and what Thomas Jefferson was doing. Because after all, isn't that the ideal for the American man? Perhaps what you need to stop worrying about is men who want that idea of the American man. Perhaps, and this is why America cannot vet them, is because you need to vet for the whole idea. Because the whole idea is corrupt. This does not mean every American man has that as the goal. It means that that concept of we can do anything to reach our material dreams, and the reaching those dreams will allow us to do anything we want to anybody as long as we provide a sufficient body of work. Maybe you need to not worry about whether or not he can take you to the highest restaurant in town. In fact, on a first date, maybe that should worry you a little bit. Maybe what you want to do is spend as much time in daylight hours in public places and get to understand what makes this man tick, what motivates him, and if you're going to end up being on the wrong side of the kind of man that wants to do anything that's necessary in order to get to a goal where he can be God on earth. And maybe what you need to find out is this what you're dealing with? Maybe you need to find out, is this man have an actual working good knowledge of what the United States actually is and has done, and where does he stand on it? Is it the goal to become a founding father type man anyway? Or does he understand that paradigm is limited and has stepped outside? Now, if he has stepped outside, it depends on whether his outside is compatible with your outside. But if you're inside as a woman right now, are you paying attention to the news? They're getting ready, because certain populations are crashing, to want to be able to force births. So if you want to be inside the paradigm, okay. But I'm suggesting that you get out of the box so that you can vet for that, because the United States is not going to be able to help you on this, because the United States is going to be committed to its own foolishness. It's going to be committed to its own good, and it's going to be committed to its own evil. No country is perfect. But it's not going to be able to help with this. It's not going to be able to help with this because the United States would have to reckon with itself. The United States, to succeed in the 21st century, will have to learn to compete with the most ignorant, the ignorant version of itself that it was in 1950. The odds are not good on a macro level that this is going to happen. On a micro level, the United States does not have vetting tools to vet these men, but you must learn. for yourself and for any children you have now or in the future may have. I don't want to necessarily say vet for Americanism, because to a point we all are in there. And there have always been people who, inside the American paradigm, are less wedded to materialism than others. Always. Because we're still talking about American subcultures. We're all, people talk about, I'm an African. No, if you grew up here, you were acculturated as an American. And the only way that you really find that out is go to Africa and try to live on American terms, and you'll see. Go anywhere in Africa, any of its 54 countries, any of its almost countless regions and cultures and languages, and you'll find out, no, you are an American and will be treated as such and will have certain common problems. But there's certain things, people inside America who have always understood that the Bill of Goods was just that, and have sought in the great opportunity and the great amount of space that the United States of America still provides to live a life that is more in accord with peace and contentment. Maybe you don't need to make $100,000 a year. And even if you have it, maybe it doesn't make you any different or any better. It makes you different, but it doesn't make you better than anybody else. Put any number in there you want. There are people who live a quiet and peaceful life who could live on 40. There are Black men who could live on $40,000 a year. I think I'm going to do my second close. My father is a Baptist preacher. It's interesting to me online. I look at travel channels and farming channels. You know what? I found out something interesting. People who have divorced themselves from the urban life, whether they're interracial or Black and Black, their families are doing very well right now. They have a common purpose and a common sense of life that does not depend on them acquiring the next whatever. They live on much less free cash than most Black women think they could live comfortably with. They live in communion with nature and with their neighbors. Now, obviously, whether I'm looking at a farming channel or a travel channel, obviously Black farming is definitely shrinking. And travel is becoming interesting in certain areas of the country too because of COVID-19. So I'm not saying this is a panacea, but I see couples of all mixes and no mixes at all who seem to be healthy and whole and are raising healthy and whole children. And then some of them are a little older. So they're not necessarily raising children, but they're enjoying life together because they are enjoying the finer things in life. Being creative, being connected with a community of secure, like-minded people. Shout out to Vitamin Q, and a society of people who are secure in themselves and not having to compare themselves with the materialist next door. Connectivity. They value the human things that have upheld reasonable civilization since the beginning. And they seem to be doing well. And if you look at Stephanie Perry and her circle of women, you see that they are doing the same thing. They are no longer concerned with the pursuit of what America says is important. Even if they're living inside the country right now or traveling the world, they are making connections with like-minded people and making connections and making themselves useful to the people where they are, and are learning how to be of value wherever they go in the world and working collaboratively with like-minded women around the world. So when you shed this materialism, competitive-based individual dominance mindset, you're able to make connections with other people in a more organic way. Theoretically, although obviously inside the country this is more difficult, there are men and women who are on this journey inside. Like I said, I found out about the slow living movement from a Black man in London who, living in the heart of what used to be the British Empire, is peeling off, recognizing that what he values is time to walk through the park on his way to work, recognizing that what he values is not time spent on these computers, but time spent in nature, time spent going to coffee shops. I think we have an appreciation for that we didn't have before. We can't take it for granted. Appreciation for being able to be out among people, even if certain precautions are necessary, to be with one's neighbors, returning to things where human beings and human life is valued for what it is. And obviously, spirituality becomes part of this journey. I'm not talking about church. In 1950, when we had all this unquestioned foolishness going on, people were going to church, but people were not talking about the fruits of the Spirit. The fruit, I'm sorry, ninefold fruit, more like an orange. Love, joy, peace. I'm gonna say this again. What would you trade? What in America would you trade if you could have something that you cannot buy? Jesus paid it all. You come through him and you don't get it. A life dominated with love, joy, peace, long suffering, gentleness, goodness, meekness, faith, and self control. I think they called it patience once because King James and the ESV and NIV are going around in my head. 9 parts. What would you do to have peace and joy and love to be a feature of your life? How much would you pay for that? What would it profit you, as the Bible says, to gain this whole world, everything America had to offer you, and lose your own soul? What would you give in exchange for peace in your soul? When you talk about Christian men, are they just men who want the same thing America provides them, but they have a suit on and they go to a church building? Are they still those same men? I went to an incident recently. A whole church official said something that would have been more appropriate said in the street. I'm like, all of y'all lost. You may not be unsaved, but in terms of being able to walk with me, I called my pastor and said, yeah, I'm gonna eventually be in a mixed church because I'm not gonna marry into black male church culture. I just can't do it. He's like, well, I don't think he meant it the way that you are taking it because I'm closer to his age. And when such and such happened, then it meant this in that context. I'm like, well, I can't fault people your age. Y'all grew up on Superfly and Shab, but I'm telling you now, as an advocate for younger black women and girls, I'm not gonna marry into this church culture. I see why the Lord would not let me do that. Absolutely not. I'm not gonna give any kind of identifying where the incident took place. Just know it happened in the San Francisco Bay Area. And my dad's sitting around like, yeah, I probably caught COVID up there. So you don't risk your whole life in order that's why we can't vet folks in the old paradigms. Now, church paradigms, that's a whole nother discussion we don't have time for today. But the first thing you have to do is to recognize and detox yourself from this paradigm. Okay, we're done. Shout out to subscriber Trang Pack, who said, I wish you would do longer videos. Trang Pack, this is for you. All right, folks, that was a lot. I have a lot of other content for you, but I had to put some time in on this. FD signifiers video, dissecting the manosphere, and getting into why we cannot vet people inside the American paradigm. Now, that was not the point of his speech, but it's what I got from it. But to understand how deep the rabbit hole goes, he will break this down to levels that I cannot do here. But just understand, it's a whole problem. It's a whole problem right now. It's a problem that's so serious it threatens the future of a peaceful United States of America. But what we have to look at is, as individual Black women living as we are living, where we are living at the moment, is being able to take from that, okay, the United States cannot judge itself. The United States is not going to vet these men because it has to question its own assumptions. So we have to get really good in questioning the American assumptions and get away from men who are too caught up. And that is how we vet men, by stepping outside a paradigm that lets them believe that if I do enough work, I can be just as degenerate as the founding fathers. That's a lot. Thank you for listening if you're still here. Have a good day now. I should have said beforehand, please don't listen to this at night. I'll put it in the description. All right. Don't have nightmares. Wake up to a different dream. All right. Good night. Well, it's night where I am. Goodbye.